like open. Or Jake.
You seen the logo already, Darsow? Okay.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this month's Ask Me Anything discussion for the Big Red 1 Year family. My name is Christian Bishop, and I will be your host tonight. Ask Me Anything is an opportunity for Big Red 1 families, soldiers, veterans to share their personal experiences of building resilient homes through the use of Army-provided resources. Our special guests for tonight are from Irwin Army Community Hospital, Captain Pinion and Wayne Darsow. So without further ado, please join me and welcome today's guest. Captain Pinion, would you like to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Jake Pinion. I'm the Chief of Environmental Health at Irwin Army Community Hospital's Public Health Department. I have 5 kids, an amazing wife who's at home wrangling them all right now in between sports and after-school programs. We do quite a bit at Environmental Health around the installation for all of Fort Riley's beneficiaries.
And would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Yes, I'm Wayne Darsow, nurse practitioner with the Fort Riley Public Health Department. I started out in the Army as a tank crewman and ended up as a nurse practitioner. I've been at Fort Riley since 2003, and my wife Julie and I consider Fort Riley and the surrounding community our home.
Welcome both of you. And so for the next 30 minutes or so, we will spend some time answering questions. If you have questions that are not answered at this time, please check back later for the responses in the comments below. So without further ado, let's get started. Captain Pinion, how did you get interested in environmental health?
So I grew up in rural Iowa, 5 minutes, like 5 miles to the nearest Walmart, or out on a gravel road, just enjoying nature. So I spent a little bit of time enlisted in the Air Force, and when that time was over, I went back to school for environmental science. So graduated as an environmental scientist and wondered what I would do with those skills. Just turns out that the Army has an environmental science officer job. And so, I get to deal with bugs, I get to test water, we inspect food facilities. It's kind of a all-in-all cool thing that we get to do.
A catch-all. So, and Wayne, which came first for you, public health or nurse practitioner?
I started out as an RN. I got a scholarship from the Army to go to RN school, and then I became a nurse practitioner, and in 2011 I left primary care and came to public health.
And what kind of draws you to public health?
Well, my boss that was kind of interviewing me for the job in 2011, he said that when you work in primary care, you get to affect one patient at a time, but when you work in public health, you may affect the health of hundreds or thousands of people at a time.
So for you, Captain Pinion, what's your favorite environmental health problem?
So I like bugs. I guess I don't like bugs, but they're just interesting to me. So in environmental health, we collect ticks that have actually bitten someone, and we send those off for testing. So far this year, we've had like 5 or 6 ticks come back positive for various diseases, and I was very proud of my wife earlier when she pronounced ehrlichiosis correctly. Yeah, it is easier to say than it is to spell. But we also have some Rocky Mountain spotted fever here. We really don't have a lot of Lyme disease because we don't have a lot of deer ticks that transmit Lyme. But I just find it fascinating, the different species of ticks that then transmit different diseases.
And are rodents or spiders common to the Flint Hills or unique to Fort Riley? Do you get a lot of calls about them?
So we don't get a whole lot of calls about rodents. Sometimes spiders. So we do have brown recluses in this area. Typically, if you find one, there are more, but they like to hide. So the best thing that you can do to try to prevent like brown recluses in your home is kind of keep it clutter-free. Keep your kind of bookshelves away from the wall a little bit. Keep the piles of shoes. Like I said, I have 5 kids, so we have so many shoes in my house. Kind of keep them organized to one area because that's where people usually get bit by that spider. Tips of the fingers and on the feet when they're trying to put on gloves and shoes.
And as the months get cooler and everything, do you see an uptick in more bites or with spiders, or is there any tips and tricks you have for kind of sealing up your houses or anything?
So the biggest thing is if you're on post, make sure you're taking care of those floor sweeps. That little strip of like fiber that keeps your door sealed up against the ground. Spiders, they might still be able to squeeze through there, but that'll prevent a lot from coming in. As it gets cold, they come in as well. And right now, I think it's fly season everywhere. I see all over Facebook. People complaining about flies. To keep them out of your house, and really with any insect issue, is you want to prevent their breeding sites. So if you have pets, clean up after them when they do their business outside. And then your trash can. So after trash day, the trash man comes and picks up our trash can, I always give a good rinse out in the trash can because that's where the fly are leaving their larvae.
Okay. Thank you for that. For you, Wayne, how does Fort Riley benefit from accreditation and public health accreditation?
Well, there's a lot of, maybe technical ways it benefits, but I think from a really simple thing is, I think everybody wants to know that they're getting quality health care and that the organizations on Fort Riley are doing a good job. So accreditation of the public health department on Fort Riley helps us know, where could we do better, where are we doing well, and it also lets the community know, we have a public health department that is accredited, and I know the whole community is very proud that Fort Riley was the first public health department to get accredited in the Army. So.
And what exactly, when you say public health, what does it kind of encompass, and what is your day-to-day job?
So I'm just one subsection, kind of the public health section of the Department of Public Health, or the Department of Preventive Medicine on Fort Riley. So my day-to-day work involves a lot of work with STDs. I deal with latent tuberculosis. We deal with communicable diseases, things like that. And then there's other departments. Captain Pinion's department deals with separate sections and the environmental health and the things that are involved with that. Sometimes we kind of work together. If they get a tick that tests positive and then we contact the patient and they have symptoms, we may prescribe antibiotics for that patient. So that's kind of nice when we have that connectivity between our sub-departments.
And what lessons did you learn as a public health department from the COVID pandemic?
I think we learned an awful lot of them. One of them would have been, as a whole, our country was in a bad position as far as testing when things started out. I know the initial things from the CDC would talk about that patient could get discharged from the hospital when it had 2 subsequent negative tests and things like that. And we learned how to kind of learn as we go kind of things, and we learned that that wasn't a realistic thing. And then initially we only had PCR tests available, and then we had antigen tests, and we learned how to really more effectively use those tests. For instance, the hospital had a drive-through antigen test line, and that allowed for quicker results, more people to be tested. And then the country as a whole progressed to antigen test kits being sent to people's houses. And now a lot of the testing is done by individuals themselves. And so they've learned, I think we as individuals learn more about managing it ourselves, when to stay home, how soon can I go back to work, things like that. And we learned how to communicate with the hospital and with the community better, I think.
Well, I thank you for that. As we shift back to Captain Pinion, so bats is always a huge thing. Should we be scared of bats? What attracts them to some homes and not others? But you always kind of get the ghost stories or the horror stories of I have a bat in my chimney. So
we get quite a few of those here. So just kind of the topography of the Flint Hills area, it's very conducive to a lot of bat species. They flock to this area. You couple that with the amount of historic homes that we have. So those historic homes, built in the 1800s, impossible to seal every crack and crevice. Bats, they can make themselves very, very, very small and squeeze through those little areas. Personally, I love bats. If one got into my house now, my wife will probably make me get it out of the house. But I try not to harm them in any way, because they eat so many mosquitoes and so many, bugs that we really don't want. Now, if you're asleep and you wake up and there is, you notice that there's a bat, you probably should set up an appointment. So bats are a known rabies carrier. And so if you're asleep and you notice that there's a bat, you don't necessarily know whether they've bit you or scratched you or even licked you. So rabies is transmitted through saliva. So even if you don't have a visible bite, there could be potential there. And so you just want to get assessed. But like I said, I love bats. Don't kill bats. They eat a lot of mosquitoes that drive everybody else nuts in the summertime.
And you kind of talked about the topography of the Flint Hills and bats, but is there anything else that's kind of unique about the geographic area that kind of brings, like June bugs? People, when they get to Kansas, not a lot of people have experienced June bugs, and so there's just some shocks.
Right. And so we do have a lot of June bugs here. We also have a lot of the Japanese beetles. My dogs always try to catch them in our backyard, and then they regret it when they do catch one. But it's just kind of the area we're in. We're in that fine, kind of Mason-Dixon line, where we don't have super, super harsh winters, and we don't have ridiculously hot summers, although if you were here this summer, it felt like we did have a very, very hot summer. So a lot of those insects, like the June bug or like the Japanese beetle, they don't have a very long kind of hibernation period, so they're just able to breed and be prolific without a giant winter kill-off like, say, Minnesota or Canada would have.
Farmer's Almanac says we're supposed to have a harsh winter, so we'll see. But
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. So, and kind of transitioning back to you, Wayne. can you just kind of talk about, we've kind of not necessarily transitioned from COVID, but we were starting to see in the news a little bit more about monkeypox. Is this something, could you talk a little bit more about it, and then kind of let us know?
So, worldwide, we started hearing about monkeypox in the context of cases in Europe and other areas. Typically would involve raves or large parties where people would have anonymous sex with one another, that type of thing. So initially there was a lot of talk about, oh, this is going to be a sexually transmitted disease, but that's not really accurate. We've had previous outbreaks in the U.S. In 2003, we had an outbreak that was associated with importation of rodents, prairie dogs, things like that. So monkeypox has been present in other countries, for instance, Africa, for a long, long time. Our concern with the U.S. is we don't want it to become what you call it endemic, or kind of dormant and then rearing its ugly head periodically in the U.S. So we look at decreasing risk for high-risk groups. That would be, public health has always discouraged anonymous sex, but especially men who have sex with men. We talk about at least until 14 days after second vaccination, decrease that. Use condoms. Know your partner, that kind of thing. Talk about stuff ahead of time. Have you been sick in the last couple of weeks? Any fevers, any rashes, things like that. Travel to an area with monkeypox. We see more in some states. There's been many more cases in California and New York. There's been some cases in Kansas. I think I looked at the CDC site today and they said around 14. I think recently Sedgwick had a couple of cases. There was kind of a near miss involving Fort Riley, but the person got sick and said, oh, I'm not going to come to Fort Riley. And that was kind of a wake-up call for all of us. And so basically, we, just as the CDC does, we push the high-risk groups. Hey, we think this vaccination would be good for you. There's two vaccinations for smallpox, basically. There's the ACAM 2000, which is an older vaccine, and it's a live vaccine, and the problem with that vaccine is it can spread to other parts of the body. If I get vaccinated on my arm and I'm not paying attention and I scratch my eye, I can literally get it in my eye. The newer vaccine, the Jynneos, the one that we use as protection against monkeypox, it cannot spread to another part of the body. It's an attenuated vaccine, so you kind of crippled vaccine or a weakened vaccine, which is very, very appealing to it, both for monkeypox and potentially for smallpox vaccination. One thing we do try to tell soldiers, hey, the enterprising soldier, even in this generation, that still happens. So anybody that needs a vaccine for smallpox for the military, the monkeypox vaccination route does not cover that. It's got to be a certain dose and method and everything. Right now, that most of the Jynneos vaccination is being given as an intradermal vaccine. So basically on the forearm, just like you would get a PPD TB test, they will inject the medication, and that allows one vaccine to really be extended to 5 vaccines. So it's kind of a force multiplier for vaccines, if you will. And that's very promising. I got an influenza vaccine years ago, the intradermal route, and all I experienced with that was increased itching. And they're kind of saying the same thing, intradermal versus the subcutaneous with the Jynneos vaccine. You're going to see a little more itching, a little more redness, but less pain. So a very useful way to give that vaccine. The vaccine is locally available locally. We've helped a couple of people get that vaccination. And talking about monkeypox, I wouldn't be thorough to not talk about what are the symptoms. So you might, if you got monkeypox, you might have a headache, you might have fever, you might have body aches, malaise, fatigue, and then a couple of days later you'd start getting a rash. It might start on your hands, face, even inside your mouth. And the thing about monkeypox lesions that we want people to know is a lot of times they're much more painful than you think they would be. So picture the most uncomfortable lesions in your mouth you've ever had. So And we can avoid that by, being safer with sex and getting vaccinated, things like that. These lesions, they'll look like blisters or pustules, and that person is infectious until those scab over and new skin starts to go on top of that. You can get vaccinated if you've got exposed to monkeypox. That's what we talk about, that connectivity of knowing that sexual partner. So you want to keep contact with them for at least 21 days after that sex, and that way they can contact you, hey, I got monkeypox. And if they do that, you can go to your local health department, and ideally within 4 days of exposure, but out to 14 days after exposure, you can get vaccinated and markedly decrease your chance of actually getting the virus, or at least if you do get the virus, having milder symptoms. It's rare, but this can cause fatality. So we might have said it's kind of a cousin to smallpox, but a milder cousin. So it's rare in the US where medical care is excellent. It's rare for people to die from it, but it does happen in other countries where medical care is poorer. You're at higher risk if you're pregnant, if you're under age 8, or obviously if you've got immunocompromised.
Well, thank you for all of that information. We're going to transition back to Captain Pinion. I feel like, we are on two completely different spectrums of health, but it's great because it's a side that we don't really get to talk about a lot. And so kind of transitioning back, and I know you love animals, so snakes.
That's the one animal I don't mess with.
So,
but it's all right.
So are there snakes common? Are there anything? Should we be scared?
Well, so I don't personally mess with snakes. Typically go the other direction, and that's the advice that I would give anyone else as well. At another installation that I was stationed at, I left for lunch and came back, and there was a gentleman trying to bring a baby copperhead in so that this hospital I was stationed at would make antivenom. Don't do that, please. We get our antivenom from the exact same place everybody else does, and that's through ordering through the pharmacy, and it's made in a lab. So we don't make it from snakes. So if you do see really any snake, whether it be you think it's a copperhead, a water moccasin, which get confused with many of the other water living snakes, leave it alone. We've had a few garter snakes that have made it in our yard. I left them alone, but my children were able to remove it from the property safely without me being there, because that would have been a funny sight for them to see. But yes, so we do have copperheads, and we do have some rattlesnakes here. Just avoid snakes.
So the topic, another topic is, you guys talk about environmental and inspections. So when you guys go to restaurants, CDCs, or even the DFAC, there are letter grades on the doors. Your office does the inspecting of them. So can you just talk about the letter grades? And recently we just went somewhere and it had it was a gold A.
Ooh.
So can you just kind of talk about just some kind of common things that you see, just some tips, and then what is the golden A?
Okay. So we utilize here on Fort Riley the Tri-Service Food Code. It was formerly TV Med 530, but now it's the Tri-Service Food Code. So the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy all use the exact same food code. And so my inspectors, the 68 Sierras, or preventive medicine technicians, they go out along with the environmental health tech, and they do either monthly or quarterly inspections on all of the eateries on Fort Riley. So there's a current agreement where every eatery will post their letter grade. So like an A letter grade would be 0 critical findings. Now when I say critical finding and that there was one, some people get they kind of take it the wrong way. So a critical finding is, it can be kind of something that you would think is small, like at home. Like there could be like some food residue on some shelving. Maybe there was a bad batch of like strawberries, something like that. Well, all of those findings are corrected right then and there on the spot, or else the facility fails. And they all know that, so they take care of it very quickly. And we have to inspect them while they're actually like cooking for a meal. So, things kind of get jumbled around sometimes, and so, there could be some deficiencies that if we went in there when it's not, crazy and everybody running around, that situation could have been fixed. And then we get down to a C, which is our, it's still passing. It's still, honestly, like a perfectly safe, like good eatery to eat at. I would much rather eat at pretty much anywhere on base because of how well our facilities, take care of their kitchens than really anywhere else. We inspect, like I said, monthly or quarterly, whereas on the civilian side, outside the gate, it's usually like every 6 months or every year that they get inspected by the health department. So an A is the standard. That's what we want every facility to be at. It's less paperwork for us, and it gives the facility like that, big smile, feel good, we're doing everything right. Unfortunately, A's are not very common because they are very, very hard to get. And the golden A, that is the epitome of excellence. So that means that you've received an A on 2 out of 3 of your quarterly inspections, or your monthly inspections. So basically your last 3 inspections, 2 of them were A's, which is, once again, very, very, very hard to do. So if you see that golden A, just know that the staff in the back is putting in some work.
Thank you for that. We'll finish up with just one more question. So it's flu season. So are there any tips or any advice? And then do you know when we can start receiving flu shots?
Well, the predictions from the southern hemisphere, we always get kind of like, hey, what's our flu season going to be like from what their flu season was like, and the word is it was more difficult, more severe. So the recommendation would be for everybody to get the vaccine. It's present on Fort Riley. You can kind of inquire with your clinic as to getting the vaccine. The flu season in Kansas typically peaks late February, early March. It's kind of timing, right? So it takes at least 2 weeks after a vaccine to get full immunity from that. And so for most people, it's kind of that timing, like when am I going to fly next? That kind of thing. But for most people, it's typically really, really start thinking about getting the flu vaccine in October.
So as, like I said, is there any other thing you'd like to let the crowd know watching as a public health advisor for Fort Riley?
I probably should talk a little bit about how monkeypox is spread. I kind of missed that in my little thing there. It's not nearly as easily spread as COVID. Prolonged physical touching with somebody, contact with secretions from a rodent that's infected. And again, we don't have it in our rodent population in the U.S., thank goodness. But contact with secretions with a person that's infected with it, and alternatively droplets. If you're sitting right next to them and they're coughing a bunch and things like that, but not, some respiratory diseases we can kind of get from passing people in the grocery store, monkeypox, it takes prolonged contact and stuff. So that's why we don't see as many cases and everything, but still something we want to pay attention to. And if you're in that high-risk group, seek the vaccine and everything. And that's kind of the spiel on that.
Well, thank you, Wayne. And Captain Pinion, is environmental, is there any last tips or advice that you would give our audience?
So I guess I haven't really touched on water a whole lot.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty hefty part of our job as well. So we have one of 2 that are certified water labs in the Army, and we go out and we test for bacteria, and we test for the pH and the chlorine of water, specialized tests that the DPW and the Fort Riley Utility Service, they send off some specialty tests that test for pretty much everything else. So the Consumer Confidence Report, if you're concerned about Fort Riley's water, I drink it, I love it. It's I think it's pretty good water. It's published on the DPW website, and we have it on the IAC website as well. But that's all public knowledge, and it literally goes through everything that the Fort Riley water was tested for over the previous year. So the biggest complaint that people have is that we have hard water here on Fort Riley. And we do. The biggest thing with hard water is you might see that like that film on your shower, like that soap scum. So hard water, not as good for cleaning, but it's perfectly fine for drinking. So it's just that calcium and that magnesium, and maybe even some iron deposits that your body needs anyway. However, washing vehicles with some hard water is going to leave those little water spots on them. And really the best way to take care of that is like an inline filter. Just pulls out some of that extra particulates. But yeah, that's Fort Riley's water in a nutshell.
Well, thank you. Again, I'm sure your wife is probably like, come on, Captain Pinion, 5 kids running around, and your wife too. And I'd just like to thank you guys both for taking time and letting the audience kind of know a different side of Irwin Army Hospital, the public health side and the environmental side, the secret capes behind. Again, if any questions were not answered, please drop them and your responses will be answered. If you would like to be a part of the Ask Me Anything series, you can contact 1st Division, the Public Affairs Office. Thanks again and have a great night.